A pivotal moment for the political party, a defining moment is the term that Secretary-General of the African National Congress, Fikile Mbalula, used, that this is a moment for them to reflect, and most certainly what they're going to do now is protect the gains and also advance the national democratic revolution. This is going to be quite the topic to be unpacked today. That's the NDR, and also going to look at the forces, or at least what they would term the balance of forces. But we're joined in studio here, our makeshift studio, by Professor Susan Booysen. Professor, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Quite a lot taking place today. We've used the term a pivotal moment or defining moment for the African National Congress, given that they're meeting this time around after a significant loss in the elections last year. So most certainly many would assume this would be a moment of reflection. Your analysis on just what you've seen thus far, from the political overview that we've heard from the President to even the midterm report from the Secretary-General, are you getting a sense that there is a level of urgency and need to correct the missteps on the part of the African National Congress?
I certainly detect that level of urgency. The exact scope of it remains unclear, because we have to remember that it is a good 2 decades now that the ANC has been sounding alarm bells as to possible decline if XYZ doesn't happen. And that XYZ, like corruption, maladministration, personal enrichment, joining the movement, the ANC, for insincere reasons, those reminders have been coming since at least 2000 at the NGC that was held in the Eastern Cape in 2000. But there is more of an urgency now. I think there's a general recognition by the membership, more than in the past, that this is a last chance, probably the last chance they have now, to make a definitive difference, to change conditions on the ground, to change delivery to their supporters and South Africans in general, and to make sure everybody understands that they are actually a very sincere, I see them as a really sincere organization, because given the scope of sequential electoral declines, they are now at the moment. If they, I would say this is a lot. Yes, they've already slipped below 50%, but if they do not reverse that slippage this time around, come the next election, local government elections next year, and then further elections 2 years later, then they will never do that. So maybe if one looks at the trends of support over the years, they have already gone past that possible reversal point. But in their own minds, and given the continuous weakness of opposition politics in South Africa and fragility of some of the predominant and rising political parties, there is a chance that they could reverse it. But so much remains to be done. And so there's such a huge gap. That's one of my big impressions too, are the narratives matched with research about their actions to date. The big gap. They know they are in serious trouble, but they still say we have to get a plan to address this. We have to put systems in place. And if those are not in place at the moment, I think there's a big chance that they're going to miss that bus.
The Secretary-General yesterday reminded delegates of the ANC that defeated the apartheid regime, reminding them of the unity that they displayed then, unity in purpose and also clarity in their strategy. When one speaks of the ANC pre-democracy and the one that is post-democracy, there are, of course, there's a lot of discord and disunity because of factions. How difficult a task lies before them if you think of the fact that as a government, or at least a party in government, many of the deployees now have proximity to power and access to resources. So how difficult will it be for them to instill that level of discipline and going back to being that political party that actually wasn't in government? There was no reward. So there was that unity of purpose and clarity in strategy, because they were pulling in one direction where perhaps now they've admitted some are not pulling in the same direction.
Yes. Of course, historically, overall, yes, there was one direction. There was that objective of liberation from apartheid, racist rule. And they were united in that. But within the pursuit of that objective, there were many different factions, different ways, different levels of adherence to armed struggle, for example. It was a big point of contention within the movement about the adoption of that method. We know in the end it really contributed to success, but even then there were different strains, and we certainly see those strains at the moment. We hear the narratives like it's necessary to pull together to be one party, but we know it is not going to work that way. Leadership contests are looming, even broadly allowed in this conference, more than what some other
I do want us to touch on that leadership contest, and as much as they've stated that it shouldn't be a conversation at this very council or congress, if you will, but we'll touch on it a bit later. I want to take you back to this. You're saying that even as a liberation movement, pre-democracy, that there were differences, there were factions. You actually remind me as we speak of the Careerism memorandum in 1969.
Precisely what I'm thinking of.
That the president also in his political overview spoke of the issue of careerism. And this was something that Careerism back in 1969 when they had the Morogoro crisis.
Exactly.
He spoke out against a kind of politician that was emerging even at that time, before they were in power, of careerist politicians who were almost abandoning activism and abandoning the revolution. But here we are in 2025, a governing party that has been in government for 30 years. They're still talking about this problem of careerism. Can they honestly root it out? Or some people do view politics as a career now.
Yes, many of them really do. And if they're not the primary career or the only career, they are often seen as supplementary careers. Many of the representatives of the ANC and other parties, the ANC in this case we're talking about, are already in business, and they want to be in public positions, even in elected positions, in order to further strengthen their business interests. That has been a big trend in ANC politics, and we should also expect that that will be exacerbated as ANC delegates, representatives realize that the time is probably running out. We've already seen the time has run out, where they have sold political power in governments at various levels, various places. But the lesser their chances are to make it into represented positions, elected represented positions, then the bigger the infighting is going to be in the party, and the more the recognition is going to be that this is probably the last chance they have to get into lucrative positions. And that is where I think the narratives, for example, the ones we hear at this conference, are far more ambitious than the reality on the ground is likely to be.
I want us to shift to ideology. The African National Congress is still, to a great extent, rooted in ideology, even just the use of the language, even in 2025. The nomenclature we've been hearing of the National Democratic Revolution, the motive forces, meaning this is the electorate. They're still referred to as the motive forces. They talk of the balance of forces as well, and material conditions, all of the terms that are synonymous or part of the lexicon of the African National Congress. Ordinary citizens are constantly looking beyond debates to locate their own benefits in whatever conversations. They always want you to come back to the bread and butter issues. But yesterday we saw an SACP that went on stage and reaffirmed its position to go it alone, again rooted in ideology, I suppose, because they felt as though an alliance or coalescing of political parties, among them being the Democratic Alliance and Freedom Front Plus, was probably moving away from the ideology of the African National Congress. Is there still a time in 2025 when the economy was almost but crippled by load shedding in years past, and what we're seeing happening in the world order itself? Is there still a place where a political party can be so rooted in ideology and not willing to shift, when really at the heart of it must be the needs and wants of ordinary citizens? Can they continue to be married to ideology?
The ANC has been brilliant at doing everything, having the cake and eating it, maintaining the ideological narratives, the pronouncements that positions them as a very radical pro-revolutionary National Democratic Revolution, for example, movement that really have the interests of ordinary people, of the masses and of working class masses and below working class masses at heart. So they really work hard to maintain that narrative. But on the other hand, and they do this simultaneously, they have already shifted.
Yeah.
We can look at basically 3 decades of government policies. They say at least 2.5 of them, the ANC was in sole control. And we didn't see much of that, those radical policies being realized at all. We didn't see drastic movement on transformation of land, on land restitution, return of the land, etc. They had so many opportunities in those decades to correct that, to do more. We know they have done some things, and it was always predicated by the Constitution, constitutional provisions. But even in that ambit, they could have done more. But now they use more, they rely more on moves, like tactical moves. They describe the government of national unity and alliance with that. Non-ideologically aligned,
yes, and referring to some
alliance.
of the political parties as strategic opponents. But just in closing,
Yes.
we are running out of time. What then becomes of the alliance when you hear an SACP's leader, Madala Masuku, stating that we will support the ANC in their campaign come local government elections, but we will also strengthen ourselves to go it alone? I mean, it sounded to me like a contradiction that you're going to support the ANC in their campaign, but you're also going to go it alone. What becomes the electoral base that you're eating from? Aren't you taking from the very ANC then?
Yeah, there's total contradictions in that. I'm sure somebody wasn't really considering exactly what they are saying. One either supports and is in alliance with, or one is not. The SACP on occasion in the past has already gone it alone, and this time they are said to want to go it alone because they're not sufficiently heard in the government, and with coalition government they also believe they are being sidelined in relation to the Democratic Alliance. So it is, their going it alone is an effort to be heard ideologically and in recognition in policies. And there's no way that you can do both support and opposition in any election, including local government elections.
Professor, thank you very much for joining us here at our makeshift studio. That is political analyst Professor Susan Booysen.